Hey everybody, I'm Jeffrey Waite. Welcome back to a new edition of the NetTouch Plus screencast of the week. We are going to be discussing AJAX with raw JavaScript, not jQuery or any other framework for a change. Before we get into it, if you enjoyed these videos and the tutorials on the site, please take a moment to subscribe to our RSS feed. And if you are interested, we also offer a Plus service. It's $9 per month. It includes every site in our network, and it has great freebies and high-level tutorials and video tutorials and things like that. So check it out if you are interested. Okay, so we are going to be discussing how to make AJAX calls with raw JavaScript. Now, frameworks like MooTools and jQuery make it very easy, but you need to learn, if you don't already, you need to learn how to do it the raw JavaScript way. It'll only make you a better programmer. So I'm going to open up Coda. I'm going to be working on my server, and I have added just one file called test.txt, and it just has some random text. So let's create a new file, and we're going to call it index.html. All right. We have a container. We're not going to be using jQuery, so I'll get rid of that. And we are ready to begin. The first thing that we need to do is create a new instance of the XML HTTP request object. Now, this is what allows us to make asynchronous calls. Now, don't worry, it's going to get more and more complicated as we go, but I want to keep it as simple at the start, and then we can look into browser consistencies and things like that. So within it, the first thing, let's create a new variable, and we'll call it XHR for XML HTTP requests. XHR. New XML HTTP request. All right. The next step is to listen for something called onReady state change. So basically, when you request a file or an image or something like that, there's 4 different levels for the ready state: 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 0 is obviously hasn't initiated. 1. To be honest, I can't even remember exactly, but 1 and 2 are when it's in the process of making the request. And 4 is when the request has been completed and the information has been returned. And that's what you really want to listen for, because you don't want to be doing anything if the operation has not been completed just yet. So we will do xhr.on. XHR, remember, is an object, so we have access to a bunch of properties and methods. So we can do xhr.onReadyState change, and that's going to be equal to a function. We can put it right here, or we'll just assign it. We'll call it some callback. And let's go ahead and create that function right now. Function some callback. And the first thing to check for is to make sure that the ready state is 4, or we can listen for, if it's not 4, then we can tell it stop what you're doing. So we can say if xhr.readyState is less than 4, then we can just return. Don't do anything. Let's do another one. Another one to listen for is the status. What if the operation was completed, but it returned a 404 page or something like that? So if we want to listen for a successful page, that would be 200. So with that same thinking, we can do if xhr.status is another property, does not equal 200, then there was a problem. Or we could do, if not, I believe 200 through 299 is successful. So to be honest, I'm not sure whether it would be smarter to do if status is greater than 200 but less than 300. I'm not sure. I can look into that. If it's not 200, once again, we can do maybe alert, there was a problem, and return, or just get rid of the alert completely. All right. So if the code is run and it hasn't returned yet, then we know all is well, and we can run our operation. So for now, we will do a console.log, and we will do xhr.response text. Okay, response text, that is a property. That's what's going to be returned. So we've run our function, but now what we need to do is actually request a page. So we'll do that now. xhr.open, and it's going to accept 3 parameters. The first one is going to be the request method. We could use post or get. We're going to use get, which means it's going to be sent through the query string. The second one is going to be the URL. What URL are we requesting? In this case, we are requesting test.txt. And the final parameter is asynchronous. That's going to be a Boolean, true or false. If you're working with this, it's almost 100% of the time going to be true because we are making an asynchronous request. All right, and then the final method is send. Now, if we were using post, we would want to send through some value. So we could do, first name equals Joe and things like that. But because we are using the get request, it's going to be sent through the query string. So send, we'll just keep that as a blank value. So let's save that and let's go into Firefox. And I have this running on my personal server. It's test.jeffway.com. And if everything worked correctly, we would have, let's clear that. Whoops. Refresh that again. And we are getting this just a test. These are no firebug. Why don't we get rid of strict warnings? Okay, and that is what was returned to the console. So pretty cool. That wasn't too much. When compared to jQuery, literally this would be reduced to 1 line. Like with jQuery, it would be you'd find your element. So let's say container.load test.txt. That's literally the exact same thing as all of this. And as you're going to find, this is actually going to be doubled or tripled to deal with browser inconsistencies. But you're not always going to be using a framework, and you should always learn what's going on under the hood. You need to learn how your car works, okay? So let's get rid of that. So I am on a Mac here, and I'm sorry I'm not running any kind of Windows virtual, so I can't test it on IE, but I can explain it to you. If we come back, new XML HTTP request. Modern browsers implement this object, so you're going to be fine with it in IE 7, Firefox 2, 3, Safari, Opera. Any modern standards browsers are going to be able to use this. But IE 6, if you are still compensating for it, uses something called ActiveX object. Now, essentially, it pretty much works the same way, but you have to access it differently. If we try to create this instance in IE 6, it's going to return undefined or some kind of error. So what we need to do is check to find out whether we're going to be using object detection. And we're going to find out if XML HTTP request object exists, we know we can work with it. Otherwise, we're going to have to work with that ActiveX object that I explained to you. So what I'm going to do is, rather than immediately assigning XHR to this new object, we'll just close that out, create the variable, and then we'll use an if statement. And we're going to say if, we'll use JavaScript type of XML HTTP request if it's not undefined. If this object does not exist, this type of is going to return undefined. So we're going to check to see if that returns true. So if it does not equal undefined, then XHR equals new XML HTTP request. Okay? Else, we need to do a little bit more work. We're going to create, to make it even a little more difficult, ActiveX object. There's actually like 5, I believe, different versions that we can pass in, and you need to check depending on which version of the browser that they have. So we could do something like var versions equals, and I'm going to paste this in because it's a lot of code. Let me clean this up real quickly. It's going to be an array, and don't sweat this too much. It's just our versions. It's just different versions that we can pass into the ActiveX object. Okay, so it's not, to be honest, I barely memorize this. I usually copy and paste it myself. So don't sweat it too much. And why don't we put these on their own line just to make it a little bit cleaner for you. Okay, So now we need to filter through them and find out if one of them works. And if it does, that's the one we need to use. So we can use for statement to loop through this. For, let's see, for var I equals 0, and length, len, is going to be equal to versions.length, and I is less than length, I plus plus. If you don't know, this is basically just stating we're going to create a variable called I, make it equal to 0. We're going to also create a variable called length and make that equal to the total number of items in this array. And we do it this way just because it's a little bit quicker than doing I is less than versions.length, because then every time that for statement runs, it has to redetect how the length of the version. So here we can cache it. And then we say as long as it's less than, in this case, 4 or 5, we increment it by 1. All right. Next, we're going to use a try statement. And we're going to say try to take that XHR variable and make it equal to a new active X object. And within it, we're going to pass in one of these versions. And we can do that just by doing versions and I. And so if I equals 0, versions I would be this one, versions 2 would be this one, and so forth. All right. Now we're going to try that. Now, if there is an error, let's go ahead and break out of that if it works perfectly. But if there is an error, we need to make sure that we catch that, and we'll catch it silently. So we'll just do that. All right. Not too difficult. And 4. And that should do it. So we're just using some object detection. If XML HTTP request is not undefined, we know we can use it. Otherwise, we need to use ActiveX object for IE 6 and below. We'll pass in a few of these just to optimize it a bit. We try it. If there are any errors, we catch them, and we call it. All right, so we're not going to see anything different because we're still in Firefox. We're in a modern browser. Let's open up Firefox, and we still get it. But I assure you, if you check it in IE 6 and 7, you're going to get the same thing, because in IE 6, under the scenes, it's going to be using ActiveX object. Now, already we're getting to a lot of code, and what if you just simply want to request a page? Doesn't it seem silly to write all of this code? Wouldn't it be better if we could have abstracted to a function? And that's what we're going to do. So right at the top here, we'll create a function. For those of you that use jQuery, you're probably familiar. I think I went over this a little bit ago, but you could grab container and call a method called load, and then load my file.txt, and then maybe a callback function, right? And that's really all of your code. We are going to create something similar to this, okay? So a load is going to be a function. So why don't we wrap this whole thing, and we can call it function load. And let's close that out at the very bottom right here. And let's give some more real estate here. There we go. All right. So let's think of how we want function to work. As I've said in other screencasts, it helps me if I can just go ahead and write out the way I'm going to call it. So I'm going to call load, and I'm going to pass in the name of the file to load, the URL. So we'll do test.txt. And I also want to have a callback function. So we'll just do an experiment right here. And my callback is just going to be console.log. Now I'm going to have to be able to retrieve the value from the load. So we'll store that into XHR. And we'll do console.log hxr.response text. Now remember, response text is the name of a specific method. It has to be that. It can't be response. And response text is what is returned from the request. Okay? Now, if you are in Firebug, why don't we do this real quick to show you. Let's go back into Firefox, refresh the page, open up Firebug. Here's a request, and if we go into the DOM, you can see XHR, there's the object we created, and here are all the properties. So you can see response text is equal to just a test for AJAX, okay? All right, on ready state changed, while that's being changed, right now it's set to undefined. We have on load, there's a bunch of different things you can work with. If you're loading an XML file, you would use response XML. And status, remember we checked to make sure that the status was equal to 200. That's how we did it, all right? So let me go ahead and backtrack. And I'm going to come back and clean this up some more. On ready state change, instead of some callback, let's make it something a little more obvious. Something like ensure readiness. Not the best name, but I think that's fine. And change some callback to ensure readiness. So if xhr.readyState is less than 4, it's still working, so return. Something I need to remind you is on ready state change, it's not going to run just once. Remember, it's going to go through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually going to cycle through that as the page loads. So technically it's going to run 4 times or 5, including 0. Yeah, 5 times. So even if we return because it's less than 4, don't worry, it's going to run again once it goes up to 1, and it'll run again once it goes to 2, and so forth and so forth. So we had those. Let's add one more. I want to do something if it is 4, then I want to do some other code. So if xhr.readyState equals 4, remember we are checking the value, we're not assigning, so we could do triple. We'll do callback and pass an xhr. Okay, to explain this, load, we are going to pass 2 parameters, a URL and a callback function to the load function. So I'm going to go up to function and make sure that I accept those. So URL, callback. Okay. So now, let's see. Right here, I lost my, where is it? Okay. If xhr equals 4, then we can do something. And we are going to callback. Callback is going to be equal to whatever we passed in. In this case, it's going to be equal to this function. All right. So if xhr.readystate equals 4, console.log xhr.response text. So the thing to note here is, just as we passed parameters to the load function, now when we grab this callback function, we are passing in the I'm sorry, I can't say that today. The XHR object is being passed to it. That way we have access to its properties, namely the response text. So now we could just abstract this away to maybe, we could even place this into like an AJAX object, and then we could call AJAX.load, something like that we could do. And the way you would do that would be something like var AJAX, just to go it real quickly, something like that. And then we could do load equals function, and then paste in all of that code here, and then you would do ajax.load. And that way you wouldn't be working in the global space. Let me undo all this. Okay, and I think that looks pretty good. Let's try it. See if I made any errors. test.jeffway.com. Open up Firebug. Go to the console, and we have gotten it. So let's do it one more time just to make sure. Refresh, and we're getting that twice. Why am I getting that twice? Right here. We don't need that anymore. And cut that out, paste that up here. Try that one more time, refresh, and now we're getting it once. If we don't want it in the console, why don't we add it to the page? So let's see. The container, we'll do document.get element by ID, and we're going to get the container. .inner HTML is going to be equal to xhr.response text. There it goes. Just had to refresh a few times just to test for AJAX. So while we can't check it on IE, I can promise you that it works. So let's just check on Safari too. And just to test for AJAX, working perfectly. So if we wanted to load another page, we could do load. Let's add another page. New file. Another page, .txt, or it could be an HTML file, or it could be a script or a JSON file, or pretty much anything. This is another page. So now come back once again, load, this time another page, .txt, and callback. And let's just alert it to save ourselves some time. Alert XHR response text. Okay, just a test for AJAX. I think, yeah, we're gonna have to make one quick change. No, it's loading that one more time. Refresh. Yeah, it's still loading both. Did I do that twice? No. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Yeah, when we call XHR, we need to replace the get. We could even set get to a parameter that we passed into, so we could do another page, and then the method, and then the function. We won't do that here, but we do want to change test. That's why that was being loaded. We're going to change that to URL. Because remember, when we call this load function, we're going to pass in another page.txt. That's going to be stored in the URL function, and then we will retrieve it right there. So let me try that once again. Yep, this is another page, so we've loaded 2 pages. So once again, all you would have to do is just save this to maybe your AJAX page or create an AJAX object, save it, and then within your normal script, you would just load it like so. So it's still a little bit longer than jQuery's version, but it doesn't depend on a framework. And now you have a solid grasp of, maybe not a solid grasp, but a good understanding of beginning requests with JavaScript and AJAX. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please do me a favor. These take a lot of time. So if you do enjoy them, subscribe to our RSS feed. It takes 5 seconds. It'll keep you up to date on our new post. We make a new post every single day. We make a new plus post every single week with great authors and screencasts and freebies at $9 a month. Please do consider it. We would really appreciate it. And I will see you next week.